One of the stories we've been covering on Bridge City News is how Alberta Premier Daniel Smith is concerned about how the federal government is potentially looking at taking resource rights away from the provinces. And it all began with a comment from Justice Minister David Lametti. To chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has weighed in on this. What did he have to say?
He said that his justice minister said no such thing. He wants you to watch the video of David Lametti saying, "I'll look into this," and believe that it's not real. You know, when this happened late last week, the first thing that popped in my head, a guy I hadn't thought of in years, Hal, Baghdad Bob. Do you remember this guy? He was Saddam Hussein's information minister during the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s. And he was quite literally on TV saying, "Oh, there's no Americans in Baghdad," and you can hear the tanks going by. So that's what Trudeau was like. "Oh no, my minister said no such thing." He was talking about UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. No, he was specifically asked about two things, and it's important to note this. He was asked about the Natural Resources Transfer Act of 1930. That's the one that gave resources rights to the Western provinces, from Manitoba all the way through to BC. But another chief from Ontario asked generally about resource rights being taken away from the province, not just the Western provinces by rescinding that act. He wanted it across the whole country. So Trudeau denied Lametti said it. He denied it was about these specific things. The video is quite clear. The video is crystal clear, and they're trying to get you to believe something other than the facts in front of you.
Now, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said he was offered a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss this very important issue, but he turned it down. Why would Moe not make the time to meet with the Prime Minister?
This was on Trudeau's recent trip to Regina, and the Premier Moe was scheduled to be in Prince Albert. If you haven't done that drive, it's quite the distance. Memory serves me correct, it's about 2.5 hours from Regina to Saskatoon, and then about the same from Saskatoon up to Prince Albert, in that range. So 4.5 to 5 hour drive one way. The Premier of Saskatchewan doesn't have a private jet that he takes all over the place the way the Prime Minister does. So he was offered the meeting at the last minute, and they said, "You can have 5 minutes with the Prime Minister." That's insulting to the Premier of the province the Prime Minister's visiting, to say, "Yes, we can squeeze in 5 minutes for you." You know that he's meeting with all kinds of other people. The fact that they are politically at odds shouldn't stop them from attempting to work together. They have to work together. And in fact, on some issues, they've worked very well. But Trudeau clearly doesn't want to deal with this issue or the others that Moe said he needs to raise. And so Moe just said, I'm not giving up an already scheduled event and driving back from Prince Albert to Regina to meet the Prime Minister for 5 minutes. Just wasn't worth his time. He assured people he doesn't wake up in the morning trying to find new ways to fight with the Prime Minister, but sometimes it might feel like the Prime Minister wakes up in the morning trying to figure out how to fight with Western premiers.
Brian, we've chatted about the alleged secret Chinese police stations here in Canada, but so far, no one has been arrested or thrown out of the country. Now, in New York City recently, 2 men were arrested for allegedly the exact same thing. Why can't we arrest those who are allegedly setting up these so-called police stations here in Canada?
We don't have the legislative ability to do that. In the United States, they've got a foreign agents registry. And so if you're acting on behalf of a foreign government, it's like being a lobbyist. You've got to register. Your job is to be in Canada, acting on behalf of a foreign government, any government. You should have to register. Just like you're acting on behalf of a company and you're trying to speak to the government, you have to register in the Lobbyist Act. And if you don't, there are fines, there are penalties. That sort of thing should be happening. The Americans have that, and that's why these 2 men in New York City were charged. The best we could do here is go to these police stations. I call them intimidation stations. I believe I've told you I visited 3 in the Toronto area last fall. One was a convenience store, one was an office in an industrial park strip mall type thing, and another was a house. That doesn't mean that people weren't operating out of them, but these were the addresses that people would go out and harass Chinese Canadians. Well, the Americans take the harassment of Chinese Americans more seriously than we take the harassment of Chinese Canadians who came to this country for a reason, to escape what's going on in China. here we're allowing dissidents to be harassed because they speak out against the dictators in Beijing. In the United States, they don't. And these two guys arrested in New York, they're not the first, they're just the most high profile. And so we need to move towards this. The Trudeau government has rejected this in the past. They've recently said they're going to look into it. But then just Monday, the prime minister was saying, comparing it to internment camps of Japanese and Italian Canadians in the Second World War. I'm sorry, that one of these things is not like the other, as they said on Sesame Street, and they're definitely not the same thing. And by conflating them, he's actually playing into China's hands, because China says actions like this, having this foreign agents registry, is a form of racism to oppress Chinese people. That was the message they had in the last election to defeat conservative candidates like Kenny Chiu, who supported this idea.
And thanks for the trip down memory lane. Sesame Street, love that. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that he had no intersection with the Trudeau Foundation, but the alleged connections and news stories just keep popping up to the surface, including news that he vacationed at a Jamaican estate of a wealthy Trudeau Foundation donor over Christmas time. Did this break any ethics rules?
The ethics commissioner apparently cleared it ahead of time. Now, we don't know if this was cleared by former ethics commissioner Mario Dion, who has since stepped down, retired due to health reasons, or was it cleared by the sister-in-law of Dominic LeBlanc? You know, who was it that cleared this? Because that's who's in charge of the ethics commissioner office now. And so there's questions about that. But also, did the ethics commissioner were they informed that this was a wealthy donor to the Trudeau Foundation? It may not have broken any ethics laws, but it definitely looks odd when the prime minister says time and again, I have no intersection. I mean, what a weird way to speak to start with. I have no intersection with the Trudeau Foundation, and yet the connections keep coming. And so this gentleman, Peter Green, a longtime family friend of the Trudeau Foundation, or the Trudeau family, sorry, and a donor to the Trudeau Foundation, gave him his Jamaican estate for a Christmas vacation. Sounds an awful lot like the Aga Khan's Island and what went on there. So I think there's going to be a lot more questions about this.
So, Brian, Jamaica aside, you've investigated Prime Minister Trudeau's connections with the Trudeau Foundation, and you say there are far too many to not be concerned. Why is that?
Well, it's starting to seem like that Louis XIV statement, I am the state and the state is me. For Justin Trudeau, everything's connected back to him and the Trudeau Foundation and his family. This vacation, the Aga Khan's vacation, he says that he has no connections, direct or indirect, with the Trudeau Foundation. His family picks 3 of the members. His government picked 6 of the members, because the industry minister of the day is responsible for picking 6 members. Members of the foundation, the way it's structured, you have members and then you have the board. The members are more powerful because they pick the board. They can fire the board. So, he and his government and his family are helping pick this. Now, his office says he has recused himself from these decisions in the past, but it's still his government. It's still his family. The connections are there. You've got Morris Rosenberg, who wrote the report on the 2021 election, saying there was no election interference to be concerned about. Not that there was none, just it didn't rise to cross a threshold, I think was the term they used. Well, he's the former president and CEO of the Trudeau Foundation, the man that he hired to be a special rapporteur, former Governor General David Johnston. He has been one of these members of the Trudeau Foundation that I just talked about. He's now going to advise the government on this. You can look at the Senate appointments, where Conservative Senator Denise Batters has pointed out in the past, she called it the Trudeau farm team, because there's a bunch of people in the Senate who were chosen after connections with the Trudeau Foundation, and they were recommended by a panel that Trudeau put together to advise him on Senate appointments from people with connections to the Trudeau Foundation. So where does one end and the other begin? It is increasingly difficult to tell, and it's concerning. And if the Trudeau Foundation is going to continue to exist, and I don't think most Canadians would notice if it disappeared, if it's going to continue to exist, then the government has to get out of it. Let it be a foundation on its own, and stop with the government and family involvement like this, especially while the main guy in the family is the prime minister.
Brian, last week, Justin Trudeau's chief of staff, Katie Telford, testified at a Commons committee into allegations of China's election interference. Did we learn anything new from her?
Not really. She was a case study in how not to say much. Her testimony I found to be self-serving. I found it to be selective because she said, I can't talk about these allegations that have been in the media due to national security concerns, and then turned around and said that one of them was false, the claim that there was $250,000 divvied up among 11 Toronto area candidates in the 2019 election. Well, if you can't talk about Fight Club, you can't talk about Fight Club. So why is she saying, I can't talk about all these issues due to national security, but she's talking about this particular instance? If she was in the United States and taking the fifth, as they say, that would have nullified her ability to take the fifth. In our system, we don't have the same rules. Neither do we have a committee system that's as robust as what they have in the United States or in the United Kingdom. She was asked questions at times such as, when was the Prime Minister told about this? When did he find out? That's not covered by national security. She would give answers that were non-answers and say she couldn't say. Well, this is why you were called. You could have brushed up. You could have reviewed your notes. Instead, she gave evasive testimony. It was very frustrating to watch, par for the course. And you know that I'm not a fan of public inquiries. I don't like them. But I don't see a way around this anymore other than calling a public inquiry into China's election interference, because our current government wants to keep things covered up.
There's a potential work stoppage by more than 150,000 federal workers. So what are the issues and what services may be impacted, Brian?
You might not be able to get your passport, but will that really change? Passport services will be affected. Taxes. We're in the middle of tax season. And if you haven't filed your taxes yet, well, that could cause you some headaches, whether you're a business that has to file by a certain time or an individual hoping for a refund. All these things are going to be problematic. Pensions could be affected, although the union says they'll keep people in place to make sure that people are getting their required payments. We're also talking about admin support for the RCMP. So, that's a lot of workers, 155,000 going on strike at once. The main issues are wages, but there's also weird stuff like they want a social justice fund, and it would work out to about $3 million a year that taxpayers would fork over for the union to run political campaigns. I don't think that's what we need to be doing. I don't think we need to be paying for unconscious bias training that the union is asking for. On wages, look, they haven't had a significant wage increase in quite some time. Everyone's dealing with the cost of living. So absolutely, they want a pay increase. But what they're asking for is well above what the government's offering, well above what other collective agreements from major outlets have been able to garner in terms of wage settlements. For the tax workers, for example, they want an immediate 9% increase, followed by a number of annual increases that work out to 30% pay bump in 3 years. That's not sustainable. That's not what most Canadians are getting, but they're going to be asked to foot the bill on this. So it's going to be very tense few hours. Maybe they strike a deal as we're speaking, maybe later tonight. If it's not tonight, then yeah, this goes to a strike first thing tomorrow morning.
Wow. Brian, CBC is pretty upset with Twitter CEO Elon Musk after he labeled the public broadcaster as government-funded media. Now, the move even caused a bit of a political storm here in Canada. Can you explain?
Well, it caused a political storm because Pierre Poilievre had written to Twitter and said, hey, you've labeled national public radio in the States government-funded media or affiliated media. You've done the same to the BBC. What about Canada? So he did it this week. Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, the coalition of the willing, I guess, they both took him to task, saying that he's attacking Canadian culture with the help of an American billionaire. He's trying to take down CBC. They got a tag on Twitter that they're government-funded media. That's not an attack. That's true. Now, CBC protested. They've said they're going to cease their operations on Twitter. They're not going to use the platform anymore over this. And they said that they're fully independent of government. I don't believe that. A lot of Canadians don't believe that, Hal. But when they did protest and say we're less than 70% government funded, Musk altered their tag and put them down as 69% government funded. So he's having a bit of fun with them. You know, he did live in Canada. His mother's originally from Saskatchewan. He spent time there as a kid. He went to Queen's University in Ontario. He's very familiar with the country, and I think he's having a bit of fun with CBC at the moment.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.